All right. Very excited to introduce you all to today's guest. On today's episode, alongside co-host Bianca Leger, we interview a well-known and well-traveled musician. He's a Canadian singer, songwriter who spent years touring the America South. And he's also a visual artist, poet, and charismatic storyteller, a prairie shaman full of wisdom and humor. Most recently, he's created the theme music for David Suzuki's new podcast, and he's just completed his long-awaited new album titled "The Suburb Beautiful," coming out in 2022. Welcome to the Winner Circle, Scott Nolan.
Thanks for having me. We're going to start off with a song.
Yeah, that would be so amazing if we could start off with the song, set the tone. You're such a beautiful musician, and I'm so excited to continue to help you spread your story. So when you're ready.
Thank you. Here where the water breaks the sky into diamonds, I'll open myself, I surrender. For isn't this what it all was in preparation for? Love dying. All night I listen to the thunder, for the earth is a broken bell. I took 3 pebbles in my hand, I shook them like a rattle. Someday your bones will sound like that. See how the sky is a horse on fire, as the night sails bluing along. Songs of a heart seas and tiny voices echo, hoping for angels, hoping for angels. How I came to know faith is silence, how under each stone blue sky burns. In dreams you speak of ships that rise and fall upon the ocean, over and over. See how the sky is a horse on fire, as the night sails bluing along. Songs of a heart seas and tiny voices echo, hoping for angels. See how the sky is a horse on fire, as the night sails bluing along. Songs of a heart seas and tiny voices echo, hoping for angels, hoping for angels, hoping for angels, hoping for angels.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Scott.
Oh,
So beautiful. You're such a talented musician, artist, and I can't wait to dive into your story on this episode to kind of hear your hero's journey and learn more about that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. The goal of this podcast is to uplift, inspire, and empower our listeners to move forward with greater faith on their hero's journey. And I think there's so much you could offer to this conversation. And the first question that we ask all guests is a very positive one, and that is, Scott Nolan, what do you love about your world right now?
What do I love about my world right now? I've aged into myself at 46. I've really I've become aware of a lot of my hardest struggles were internal. It was me against me. So that's what I love about my world. It's simplified. It's more sober and more simple and peaceful. And I kind of have the similar routine almost every day, and I find it satisfying. So I'd say that is my favorite kind of thing at the moment anyway.
Mhm.
I love that.
So you mentioned, go ahead, Bianca.
Well, I feel like that's such a muse for a lot of artists, is that there's so much within our inner worlds. So just hearing that there's less tension and there's some stability found in routine, I can resonate with that. And I'm happy for you. I'm excited to find out more about your story.
Thank you.
So routine is such a powerful part of centering myself and Bianca and you as well from that story. So just talk to us about your routine. What have you learned through the years that has been an effective routine for you to get your day started and help center you in your being?
So much of the way my world works right now is kind of been forced into focus by living with I was told somewhere along the way they called it generalized anxiety disorder. And so I spent a dozen or more years on a medication called lorazepam to treat it. And it had kind of, it had taken my regular world and flipped it upside down. I was traveling, performing. Suddenly I had these attacks, and it's been a long process of trying to get out in front of it. And I joke with my mom sometimes that I feel like one day I'll realize it's been a gift all this time, as difficult as it's been to live with. The process of trying to kind of reconcile it and become some degree of peace with it. It's kind of there's some wisdom that's come with it, and part of that is process and routine. And years ago it started. I've always been into juicing. I fresh press, make vegetable juice every week, and friends commonly will say to me, "Oh, isn't that a real pain to do? There's so much cleanup," and it's really kind of, it's a fallacy about most things, and the process is kind of it's a part of the overall thing, and I've come to enjoy it. It calms me. It doesn't irritate me really, and that sort of thing's begun applying. I've played music and written songs since I was a boy, and again, like in my 20s, I was anxious about it and determined to make a name for myself. And now in my 40s, it's more like fishing in a way. Like I don't get up making huge demands of myself creatively. I've really become hyper aware that the best aspects of what creativity is giving me is already happening. It isn't really about the successes of my music. I've become really very aware of the fact that it's already saved my life. It doesn't really owe me anything else. So when I had that kind of epiphany, the flow of it all started working in a way that it never had. It's like, you ever hear Bruce Lee talk about become the water? It sounds kind of crazy in a way, but that was it. Like I lost a competitive edge for it. One really significant thing that happened, I was mentored through a difficult adolescence with lots of violence and substance abuse, difficult home life. I was mentored through prison letters by a cousin of mine that had taken a life in the States, and it was serving a life sentence in Folsom Prison, which is, of course, made famous by the Johnny Cash song. And anyway, nobody in my family or around me would have known this at the time, that I was having these regular dialogues through letters at a very chaotic time in my life. And anyway, it really was a guide for me at a time where I needed it the most. And all he really did specifically was encourage me to stay connected to music and art. He didn't really lecture me about drug use or lifestyle. And anyway, it very likely saved me, from myself, certainly. Anyway, my cousin really changed his life in prison. It's kind of a long story, but after I believe it was the biggest race riot in the prison's history back in 1996. My cousin, after a long period of solitary confinement, had this idea of, like, he'd been reading Viktor Frankl's memoir, Man's Search for Meaning, and Martin Luther King Jr. Anyway, he set out determined to start this men's group that was a very inclusive thing within the prison. And it took him years, and it's kind of a very complex story to explain. But it worked. And today it's a program called The Inside Circle, and there's a film about it called The Work. There's a number of films, but The Work really shows you the group. And anyway, it wound up really helping, saving lives, frankly. These men that were doing life without parole were suddenly being paroled and coming into the world with a very important skill set that we don't have in society already. You know, we don't have a college program to train these men in the Inside Circle. Mm-hmm. And so I went almost 20 years after my cousin's passing. I was invited into the prison to do some concerts and workshops. And the reason I kind of tell all that backstory is when I left that prison after 3 days, I wasn't the same person anymore, at least in terms of what I wanted from my career or anything like that. Everything completely changed. It's like when I left after 3 days, the sky looked different. I'd been traveling a lot in the States at the time. I was an opening act as well as a band leader for the headliner. And I was in exactly where I'd worked to get to, and in an envious position, frankly, of a lot of my peer group. And it suddenly overnight just didn't feel right to me anymore, or I'd lost my kind of desire for it. And when I got back to Canada, I got all these invites because of the notoriety of Folsom Prison and a little bit of media stuff I did about the trip. There was a film made about it and stuff. I started getting prison invites from all over the place. And I just did my best to go every time. I didn't know what I was doing. I've never finished high school. But I did begin to realize that, you know, music and art saved me. I was at 18 or 19 looking at a potential 3-year prison sentence in Stony Mountain for a incident I was involved in. And like, I just, you know, I started doing the visits, and I would get there and say, you know, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then one day it hit me. I realized that I'm here to remind people of how inclusive the arts are, and that, you know, you could come from a background where you'd taken life some very kind of unforgivable crimes, frankly, but the artist society will let you atone and kind of begin again if you're authentic in it. And so that whole thing shifted me. I just I began to think of it differently, and the idea of the equity you have after 25 or more years and being in this business, I realized, you know, you can do a lot with that. You have people's attention and their willingness to kind of hear you out. So that's been a big thing for me. And the more I've done it, the healthier I've become about how I feel about myself. And my anxiety is still there, but I can manage it on my own now somehow in a way that I couldn't before. So I suspect our respective journeys have been similar, Derek, in a lot of ways, different vehicles for getting to that place. When I first went to Folsom, I realized, like, there is no being the toughest in the room in these rooms. Tough means a whole new thing all of a sudden. And what my cousin did that really is amazing to me is he was that guy. He was 6'6", 285 pounds with no body fat, like a lean, strong Irish kid from Cabbagetown in Toronto that had been beaten and abused since he was a tiny little thing. And so he was like that mad dog where, geez, like, you'd be hard pressed to beat a guy like that. And at some point he realized he could use that equity, that tough guy equity, to really inspire. And what was amazing when I visited Folsom was all these men that he set out to get involved were all gang leaders. On my last day at Folsom, as a thank you, the Folsom Prison Blues Band invited me to sit in on their band practice. And I went into this tiny little arts room, and there was South Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, Bloods, Crips, and we jammed the blues for like maybe 2 hours. And it was as beautiful as any blues bands I'd played with in the free world. Like, it was soulful to see Bloods and Crips singing harmonies. I gotta tell you, it just like nothing prepared me for that reality. And I realized that my passport through it was the ability to play and write music and stand up in front of a room and do that. And so I just, you know, it hit me kind of really, really strongly that I could have rooms full of people do this for me every night, or I could do for other people what my cousin did for me as a boy, you know. And maybe somewhere in the middle of those two worlds is ideal for me. But so that's been a big part of the last decade of my life. It's really changed things.
Wow.
Such a rich story. I'm super grateful for hearing that that tale, and I'd like to hit a rewind button and get back to the origin of the birth of the artist within you. When did that happen? When did you fall in love with artistry, storytelling, and music?
Pretty sure it was always there. I was the weird one in the family. Even to this day, I think my parents, not in a negative way, but they struggle sometimes to see themselves in me because my mom's sister took her life a little bit over a year after I was born, February 1975. And she was an artist that she'd been misdiagnosed a number of times. They believed she had Lou Gehrig's disease and different things, but it got to where she couldn't hold a pencil to sketch anymore. And she wrote a couple very thorough, kind of beautiful letters and decided she was leaving. And I feel like something happened in that transfer. Like, my first guitar was something she left behind that I found as a child. So I feel like there was something in that transfer somehow. I think of her a lot, and I feel like it's in there for me because it was really always there. As long as I have memories, they were creative ones in a weird way. And I always struggled to the world I kind of arrived in, I struggled to understand it. So I always really did through art and music. As a little kid, it was Elvis on TV, like it was for a lot of people. I saw Elvis and freaked out, but my mind was always in the clouds, you know. My dad told me not long ago about how they'd put me in soccer and I would stand facing the wrong way and the ball would hit me in the face because I wasn't there. I wasn't present. And I said, why'd you keep doing that shit to me? I didn't want to be on the soccer field. But parents are well-intentioned, right? You got to get the kids out moving and doing stuff. But so, and then substances came into my life. I remember one season of track and field. I remember being pretty naturally good at high jump, and then drugs, and that was it. I don't remember any kind of physical activity or any of that kind of stuff. But it was still, even in those periods, always linked to creativity. I look back now and it was maybe a desire to create a world for myself that felt more welcoming somehow. And like Cannabis, you mentioned, lifelong affair for me. And I'm surprised actually to hear you mention it because we get used to generalities about people, and I wouldn't have taken you for a cannabis enthusiast or advocate. But when we met, when I'd go to Studio 26 to do yoga, Ivanka would say to me, you're sweating pot out, like the whole hot room would smell like pot because of me. And I didn't know, of course. I consumed so much that I wouldn't know that was happening. And she'd tease me and go, the whole place smelled like weed today because of you. And I'm like, oh, geez, see, I don't know. But it makes sense.
Yeah.
Might have been me.
Yeah, well, see? Everybody blame me.
It seems to be such a common thing with artists that there's this dream world that's not matching the external reality that's being imposed on us, and it creates so much suffering. And the art seems to be the only medicine that we can create for ourselves.
It's a calming, it's an accommodating herb in that, like, it's not like alcohol where it distorts things. I find it actually slows things down. I was with my now ex girlfriend on a walk one time, and her parents were pot people, but she was not. And we were walking. Every once in a while, she wanted a little hit, and we were walking, and she took one little puff, and before she'd even exhaled, she said, "You see, I didn't notice the way the sky looked a second ago." And I said, "You know, really," and I mean, it's not like you necessarily need pot for it, but that's what it helps you do, is it just slow things down a little bit and allow you that moment to. There's something about it that allows me to be present, I guess, is what I'm getting to. In a relaxed kind of way. And so therefore I'd go do hot yoga, and to some people they go, "Oh, geez, that can't be normal," but it is normal to me because I do everything that way.
For sure. And I think substances, as you mentioned, can be used as a drug or a medicine. Sure. And like often, like you mentioned, you have anxiety, and often like that anxiety keeps people stuck at home in their thoughts. But if you have some cannabis or something else, and it gets you outside, or it gets you to a yoga class, or it gets you to go to a community you would have been afraid to go to, like that is all beneficial. Those are all moving your needle forward. And I think there's a real misconception around many drugs, cannabis being one, a lot of stigma, whereas more socially accepted drugs like alcohol, they advertise it on hockey games, it's on billboards, and it's very terrible in comparison, not only for the self, but for the collective, for society.
Even with
let's continue down this road.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Even with legal weed, I find they're not clarifying certain things about it for the public the way they need to. Like microdosing is probably the most critical word in the cannabis realm, especially for young people, because it can not people that suffer things like bipolar disorders or schizophrenia. It can be a really lousy, like it's not helpful in those areas. That much we should be pretty clear on. But one thing I find the legal producers and the shops need to do more of, when you get a bunch of 19-year-olds coming in on a Friday night. Now, even my mom, when she finally tried pot, based largely on her curiosity with my lifelong habit with it, her and her friend would have smoked a whole joint. And it was a terrible, terrible experience for my mom. And I said, I wish you would have asked me, because I would have said, one tiny little puff and don't touch it again. And microdosing, whether it's edibles, any of that stuff, for the uninitiated, for sure, that's the way to use it as a medicine. It's tricky for me because I have an addictive personality and a history of substances. So can I trust myself to be my own self-medicator? That's one of those things that it's just a personal thing to reconcile. But my mom now uses this coconut oil that I make to help her sleep. And she takes she said the amount is about the size of a frozen pea. And that's how much she takes to sleep. So it's in that capacity, it's not getting her high, but for the first time in Lord knows how long, she could sleep through the night.
Wow.
So that's a powerful thing. And you mentioned CBD earlier. Again, with the industry being so young, you're paying so much for so little. Whereas I've begun learning how to grow, how to cultivate, how to cure, how to cook, how to work with extracts. And it's a wild, wide open world. And it's the opposite of alcohol. If you go to somebody's house and they make their own alcohol, it's never going to be as good as the store-bought. But in the marijuana world,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to somebody that knows what they're doing, growing naturally, you'll never get stuff in the store that's as good as this. So my favorite part
Yeah.
about, people grumble about legalization, and I say, forget it. You got to understand that these are baby steps. In Canada now, we can begin to have peer-reviewed studies, and there's an openness that the world is going to thank us for one of these days. But it's moving slow,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not as accessible as it should be.
Mhm.
I was joking with a political friend of mine in the neighborhood that I'm tight with, who I have a lot of respect for, and I'm glad to see him go into that world. And I have these friends in the park near me that live in the park, you know, and they're very difficult stories, all of them, but they're all lovely people, and I've always taken the time to chat with them, and I see them almost every day. And early on, I might carry a few dollars so I could buy a round if they wanted to have a round on me. And then I thought, geez, you know, one time I saw the one fellow that I liked in particular, and he was he was pretty rough shape, and I thought maybe I should bring him a sandwich next time. And then it hit me. I thought, you know what? I wonder if he likes weed. And so I saw him one day in the park and we were chatting. I said, are you a pot smoker by chance? And he grinned real big and nodded his head. And so I gave him a really, you know, like a big kind of home rolled a joint of some herb of mine, and went and did my walk, which takes about an hour and a half. And when I got back from my walk, he was asleep. And I thought, you know, see, this is good. Like this should be covered under medical care. If you live on the streets, you should be entitled to free pot, you know, or something that brings some degree of comfort, because he probably would have sat up and drank a whole bunch more hours in a row. And just as I'd kind of hoped, it hit the pause button for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thread I hear, is like calming the nervous system. This is like, it's our comfort zone. It's when we can get creative. It's when we can be present. We can see what's around. But we're so used to being in a state of like being like so worried about what's around. So yeah, that when you get your nervous system to actually chill, it's like the ultimate gift to ourselves, like slowing down, being okay with where we're at. And yeah, weed can
Creating
definitely
that whole world for ourselves. That's really
yeah, like knowing that we're safe and that we can bring forth the visions that we have inside our minds. But until, it's like, if you're always scared and nervous, you can still use art to kind of try and transmute that. Maybe I feel like music can be helpful, but just bringing your nervous system in a calm state is really helpful for bringing forth beautiful creations and just
it
being.
becomes somewhere tangible to put all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's you know, it doesn't require a degree. Or I got a letter from a woman a couple of weeks ago on my Facebook wall that was in one of my groups in the Headingley Women's Facility, and she was telling me that she's writing a book. And the day I visited, they'd taken her from her ward, and told her she'd missed court and that her child had been adopted and she would never see her child again, you know, like. And then as they're taking her back to her dorm, they said, oh, there's a singer here. You're not going back to your dorm. You're going to hear this singer. And she thought, I don't want to hear some singer. She was, you know, and anyway, so this connection wound up happening. And just, you know, again, similar to what my cousin used to kind of encourage me, like you know, it's somewhere to take that dark stuff and the struggle stuff and put it somewhere beautiful, and then it really does something all of a sudden, you know. There's like, that's why all that old music was always so, you know, like there's a lot of pain and you know, from Ray Charles on up. We don't always easily associate it that way, but it's where a lot of that stuff's coming from. And it's interesting that uh, it's not the campuses where these folks are coming from, you know. It's marginalized communities. And
Yeah.
some of the poems and songs and stuff I've encountered in prison visits and inner city schools and stuff like that, it's shockingly good. And they have the one most critical understanding, which is it forces you to be authentic at a certain point. Once you're authentic, all these other things start to work very effectively. But getting to that point first is the hard part, and you often see it in young people that struggle and have terrible childhoods and stuff. It's like they got nothing but authenticity to go from, and so it's a healthy ingredient.
Yeah, yeah, the whole deconstruction process before rebuilding, or just finding out what is there when you strip away what a lot of people and system are kind of standing on.
It's inconvenient, really. That's what people are afraid of there, you know.
Yeah.
The river, I always say the river is where I left all my bad habits. When I first quit smoking maybe 8 years ago, I just started walking, and I'd always end up at the river, and the current was always something I focused on. And I realized that anxiety felt like a current going the wrong way. And some days I could kind of slow it down enough that I could like shuffle it back the other way, and all of a sudden I started feeling better. But these walks, that was the first thing that changed things. I knew I had to quit these cigarettes. I tried and failed so many times, and I was determined that I would just get up and walk. I think I told myself 10K, which was pretty lofty, and then that's when poetry came into my life, and then ultimately yoga. I had this idea, I needed a new Friday night. All my old circles, none of them worked for me anymore. It's like all these friendships, all these relationships, just gone. And that's when I met Ivanka at the Borkvale Community Center. And it took, I've joked with her, like the Joseph Encia's story about following a cute woman into a hot yoga class. That's what Ivanka did for me. We had a friendship. I certainly felt smitten. There was like maybe a certain energy there, but it was still platonic and very respectful. But it was enough that when I went looking for the new Friday night, it happened to be meeting her in this yoga class, and she encouraged me to do the first hot class, and it was like a chain of events. And then the success of that kind of friendship led me to want to meet new people from different areas, and so it was all really healthy stuff to just kind of find a way to be present again somehow.
So many people listening, they may be feeling the same thing, where their old world no longer serves them, their old habits, their old routines, their old friends, their old circle. They don't know where to start. What would you advise them?
Well, for me, the combination of pot and creativity made me a loner a little bit anyway. I don't think I was the most social person. And as a drinker, like my people weren't celebratory drinkers. So I didn't really get that. I don't remember having fun ever, really. I'm not don't get me wrong. I'm not like an unhappy person. I don't mean it like that. But I think about the fun of those years, and like, I don't know if I really was ever having that much fun. But it was like when I stepped away from it, it didn't work somehow anymore. It was almost like going places it's like they didn't recognize you or something. I don't mean literally, but like I couldn't spend time in those environments anymore. The conversations that I found there were very, very hard to have. And but I was already okay with being on my own. So I was pretty lucky that way. And I have a couple anyway, very close lifelong friends. So I consider myself lucky that way, and that it's not maybe a quantity scenario, but I definitely have quality and people that accept me, for who I am. I didn't go the route a lot of my friends did. I didn't get married or have a family or any of that stuff. So that already is kind of a little bit alienating. But so I'm very lucky to have a couple really close people that help keep my world in check that way. But yeah, it's a tricky thing. You got to learn to like your own company. That's for sure. That's a process on its own, and a healthy one, I think. Back when I said after I visited the prison, my cousin was in and everything changed for me. I began doing this thing where when I found myself struggling with difficult or inconvenient decisions, I'd wait till I was alone and I would ask myself out loud, what do you really want out of this? And I was shocked by how effective it was for me. Like early on, I asked myself about touring, I could tell Joanna, my musical partner, was wearing down, and we were in America a lot, and border crossings were unpleasant, and there were so many rigors of the road that were becoming difficult. And so if I'd go off and ask myself out loud, like, what are you really looking for here? The first time I did that, I answered to myself, I'd like to be a blue collar artist. I'd like to get up every day and follow my heart and mind and just keep it as an open canvas. And the moment I did that was this profound shift, because I've had some modest success in terms of a couple people have recorded my songs, and I've produced some records for people that have gone on to do pretty good. And but so, this demand to like be at any particular level, or I feel really lucky in that once I made that choice for myself, I feel like maybe I already had enough years under my belt that, well, I wasn't a household name. Within my peer group, I felt respected and seen, and, so it allowed me to kind of really focus on the relationship I wanted out of it, which is a hard thing. I mean, I talk to young artists all the time, and like, man, the first thing you want is just to be heard. You just want people to recognize your songs and come to your shows and buy your stuff. Like, that's the first kind of hurdle. And but then once you start getting past that a little bit, it's never ending, really. There's layers to it that you kind of have to reconcile as you go. And but I count my blessings in that, one, I live in this country that values the arts certainly a lot more than a lot of countries do, and whatever grants and stuff I've used, which I don't use a ton of them, but I certainly have my fair share. That's part of why anytime I'm asked to come to a prison or a school or something, I just go, because I feel like it creates a healthy balance. In that, a lot of my artist friends told me how during the pandemic, people would say that maybe you should get a real job, maybe art's a hobby. I don't have that conversation with people. I don't have to live in fear of it, because I can talk about what I do and they'll go, oh shit, that's pretty cool. You just keep doing what you're doing. Like, I don't have to live in fear of justifying anything, because it's not just about me, because there's a shared quality in the experience of it. It's healthy. I don't have to defend it, or, I feel like people are rooting for this. So it's a great thing. And I'm certainly not alone. Like, there's a lot of people out there. It's an age thing too. I think if you can survive 20 years in the arts of any medium, you've already got my respect. And then at that point, really interesting stuff starts to happen. And another thing I try to tell younger artists, like, survive yourself so I can hear what you're doing at my age, because it's interesting. If you follow the industry thing and really worry about the singles and the charts and stuff, there will be a spiritual cost that you may not see coming. And when it does finally come, it may devastate you. You got to know. I said to an artist that I produced a record for once, you got to ask yourself this: what would you take? One big giant hit song, or inspiration for the rest of your life to continue writing songs? If you could only have one of those things, you're going to have one big song that's going to buy you a bunch of nice new shit, but you'll never write another decent song again for the rest of your life. What would you choose there? That's not an easy question, I did a song circle once with a songwriter, and he said to the audience, if I could just have one really big hit, I wouldn't ask for anything else. And I leaned down and said, be careful what you wish for, brother, because that stuff it'll poison your well. Every other hit, you'll measure up to it. You'll start thinking about the money part of it. And It's really hard to do. It just becomes, the whole thing becomes corrupted. And I've seen friends that were like real powerhouse writers, and the more successful their careers became, personally, in a lot of cases, the less potent their work became to me. I would notice the dips, you know, and like in the music world, there's like the other side that not everybody sees is more like politicians. We got to get out there and glad hand and go into environments that are very alcohol heavy, very toxic personalities, very alpha world, and we got to get in there and be nice, because even if our songs are the best of the best, it doesn't guarantee you their support, because the gatekeepers are not of our world. They're people that saw opportunity, so they scrambled for these jobs. But sadly, in a lot of cases, those people at the gatekeepers aren't healthy people helping perpetuate a healthy community. They're contributing to the poisoning of those wells. And so we create a terrible cycle, and it's very hard for artists to age gracefully with dignity. Spend so much time pandering. And again, I consider myself lucky in that I was, you know, people will say, I'm not in this for my health. I actually am. It saved me at a time where I couldn't have saved myself. And I'm still like inspired by other people's work. I just got up today and made a couple calls about a box set that comes out tomorrow. That's way more money than I should spend on something, but I have to have it. I could have it on the computer for free, but I have to hold the box. It's like life affirming medicine for me. And I'm so glad it hasn't left me. And I think part of it's because I haven't cheapened it for myself. I've been very careful about, it's a sacred deal. And I'm not some pop star. I have no desire at all actually to be a pop star. I feel like the majority of those pop stars have really let us down, you know, if you get up to that point, please have something of true substance for the rest of us. Otherwise, don't waste my time, you know? Like where's the next Bob Marley? You know, why don't we see any Bob Marleys out there these days? There's some, not that many though. I think about the socially active artists in my circles, and I wonder what they think of the Afghani musician that the Taliban went and hunted. This man wasn't a political songwriter singing Woody Guthrie songs. This was a man that lived in the mountains, that traveled around and played music on a homemade instrument to make villagers happy. And they hunted him and killed him in a terrible, awful way. And I sit here in Canada where I listen to all these things we bicker about, and all the divisive ideas of we got to do it this way, and you know, my rights, all these things. It's like, man, those rights are a precarious thing. Sometimes I'm not sure we understand when we use the word, do we even understand what that means? Rights? That's a loaded thing, you know. Recently, a beloved Winnipeg artist passed away 2 days ago named Nihad Ademi. I'm not sure if you know Nihad, but a beautiful, beautiful human being that he lived for at least a year in an awful, terrible concentration camp. And it took him coming to Canada, he had more lust for life than most people I know, even given the darkness he endured. And you could see it in his eyes. It's never left his eyes, but he still moved forward constantly. He knew something that we did not over here as Canadians. He knew something, you know, and then in turn, my brother-in-law served over there. He was among the people that helped liberate that camp. Another difficult conversation for me to have in artistic groups, because there's a lot of ideas about military, about police, about colonialism. There's so many layers to these things that we have to unpack carefully, because unfortunately we live in a world that requires military, or we're going to see what happens over there happen here. And so it you know, all these things are very complex, and they all kind of stay in the back of my mind. Is like, is there anything useful about these songs? Because if there is, I better figure it out in a hurry and make sure that I share them properly, because we just don't need any more pop music.
Let's talk about fear. Fear often holds people back from sharing their wisdom, their goals that they have within. What have you learned about fear and sharing on your path? The fear to release a song, or the fear to move forward, because that's self doubt or the imposter syndrome today.
Sure. In my family, my father's side, the Irish side, there was an inherent lack of fear because it was so rough. But what it was for them was self-loathing, which can sometimes present in a similar way. Um, and I was afforded a childhood that was certainly so much more stable than what my cousins and father had to endure, that it allowed me to take that. I didn't come into the world with quite that level of self-loathing. So that's, I think, part of what allowed me the confidence. Because if you knew my father or my cousins, they're confident men, but for different reasons than me in a to a great degree. I've had this conversation with my father a lot. Like I couldn't trade the dynamic of who my parents were, but they couldn't be more mismatched. You know, my mom came from kind of very modest, moderate farming people, and my father was kind of a small-time Irish gangster from Toronto. And how they came together makes little sense, but it created a lot of beautiful things. And I often say to my dad, my confidence to do what I do and the ability to talk and have people listen to you comes from your people. Not that my mom's people aren't a critical role in there too, but that confidence is born out of that juxtaposition between fear and self-loathing. I had more fear, I think, than my father did. I don't think I've ever met a more fearless man than my dad. But that was rooted in struggle and self-loathing. And it's been a very hard journey we've had together. That's better now than it's ever been. We've become very close, but it took me kind of understanding his journey a bit to be able to get to my own, to make sense of it, why it was the way it was. Fear for me, a lot of it's just me being my own worst enemy. I was never the toughest kid in the room. I was the one that was fearless enough to get my ass kicked most of the time. Very few things when I was a kid scared me in that way, but it usually led to me getting hurt or hurting myself. But I also was probably trying to live up to the people that were around me. And, you know, in school, I struggled to learn the way things were taught there. And one of the things I used to be fearful of the most was when teachers asked us to show our work. I could never show work because I didn't understand any of it, from math to English to phys ed. I didn't understand any of it. And when I got into arts and music, I've had mentors certainly, but essentially I was self-taught in the various mediums. And now I can show my work all day. You almost couldn't shut me up. Even collage art, which is the most recent thing to come into my life, I already have spent so many hours with it that I really could talk at length, not as an expert maybe, but I could talk at length about my ideas and what I'm drawn to in it. And it's because of those, it's like the 10,000 hour thing, I guess. You put in the hours and it just gives you an earned perspective, and which in turn gives you the ability to talk about it, share it. And
Mm-hmm. So for an artist that doesn't have that 10,000 hours and they're stuck with that fear, to show their art, what advice would you give them?
my cousin used to call what my cousin used to call sitting in the fire is how he processed rage when he felt violent tendencies. And in my life, it's certainly not quite as extreme as his, but it's sitting with the inconvenience of the hardships. So the anxiety, the depression, the fear, it's a willingness to be alone in a room with it for a really long period of time. And I think once you allow yourself that, you'll be surprised that the other stuff can happen quite quickly. In terms of art, in a literal sense, whether your thing is writing or painting or music, I can't say. And entering those different mediums come with different kind of strategies in a way. But in the overall general sense of it, it's that willingness to not lie to yourself and to sit with it. And those hours tend to, it's like that woman writing me, having met me in that prison group. I'd go in and say, you know, this is one of the few places I can go where people won't check their phone. I sit and talk to you guys in this group and we look each other in the eye. And in the free world, that's changing. We're starting to look at people's foreheads and around, like we're losing certain things. And these things are critical ingredients to the craft. And your relationship with struggle and suffering is actually paramount to this process. So you have to stop avoiding it. That's it. I mean, if for me, when I was doing gigs all over town and smoking and drinking and living kind of a wild thing, I was eking by. I actually did pretty good in terms of writing songs and stuff, but I look back and they were just songs about that, you know, broken hearts and bad livers and honky tonks and all this shit. And it got old. I grew pretty tired as I stopped living that way. I'm like, oh man, there's a bazillion things for me to write about. I'm glad I'm no longer stuck in this place because everything I did was funneled through that lifestyle. And now, I mean, my record that comes out next year is a collaboration with a classical composer, and we recorded with chamber orchestras and quartets. And my writing, my process, the way we put it together, it's like a whole other world and universe now. And I wouldn't have got there, I don't think, if I hadn't have kind of been willing to sit with the things in my life that were shitty, you know, and let my girlfriend leave, let my friends leave. If they elect to leave, the best thing I could possibly do for myself is not stop them. And it felt, honestly, it felt really shitty for a while. I thought, oh man, I don't have any friends. This is a weird life I have. And then I thought, oh no, this is exactly the life I've built for myself and wanted. But all the important phases of it are inconvenient, I think, by most people's standards. Like heartbreak alone. Collage art, days before the pandemic, my partner of 11 years left suddenly with no explanation. No, I was like, oh my God, I look back now and I truly didn't see it coming. And enough time's gone by that I realized, oh my God, she made a very important decision for us both. I see that now. But I was much more complacent about it than she was. And so when it happened, I was like, oh my God. And I'd hired this guy to renovate my house. And I had all these things going on. And I was sitting here at this desk and I was like ready to come unraveled. And I had a National Geographic sitting on the corner of the table. And I cracked the spine and I pulled the staples out of it. And I started going through it. And that was the first day I'd ever created a collage in my life. And I wound up doing it for 200 some odd days in a row. And I got to tell you, if there was a lot of heartbreak, I didn't have time to dwell. Like it's amazing. I actually said to my dad, I had a friend go through a similar thing and he was doubled over in grief. And I thought either my heart's dead inside or I realized that life goes on. Change is change is the greatest thing to my world, even when it's like unpleasant and the timing's bad. In fact, when my partner left, one of the last things she said to me was, I see you have your inspiration back. And it almost felt like a snide remark. And I never bothered to say this, but the truth is it never left in the first place because I'd begun to embrace it the right way and accept it. And somebody's coming or somebody's going. My real inner happiness isn't really dependent on it at all. So I wasn't doubled over in grief. I was actually sitting upright and inspired and working every day. So it's kind of a fucking miracle, really, you know, to me.
It's so beautiful. You chose the path of it. It happened for you versus the path many take, that it happened to me. Woe
Yeah.
is me. Those two roads are always there, to you or for you, and you
Well,
thankfully
you can
chose the
sit in
path
the
of it
fire, or
happened for you.
you can sit in that fire, or you can sit around it with a can of beer and your knucklehead buddies. You know, some people get stuck sitting around the fire for the rest of their lives, and that's fine. There's some relative peace to be had in that, but it's not the same. I'm not into campfires. There's nothing about camp. I don't like the smell. I don't like the passing of the. I'm not into any of that stuff. But it took me a while to realize it's because I sat in the middle of the thing. I have a whole different relationship with the fire than my friends do. And again, I owe it to my cousin to help illuminate that for me, and it becomes fuel.
So in your journey, there's been a lot of heartbreak, but there's also been a lot of love. What have you learned about love on your journey?
You know, I just learned a Leonard Cohen song, and there's a great lyric. What is it now? I've seen your nations rise and fall. I've heard their stories, heard them all. Love's the only vehicle of. Oh man, I wish I could remember. Oh, you know, let me see if I can remember this lyric here. No, I'm gonna forget it. Love's the only. Bear with me; it's worth finding. It's I have to find it because it's really perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an opportunity for us to just be here and breathe and absorb all the wisdom that you shared so far. We have all the time.
But love's the only engine of survival. That's what I agree with Leonard Cohen. I won't even try to better that. I think that's the absolute truth of it. Love's the only engine of survival. And thinking about Nihad that I mentioned earlier, I watched a little film about his life. And when he landed in Canada, that's how he began his way of dealing with the people that inflicted such awful things on his life. Every day that he moved forward and created art was kind of not letting them win. And that Leonard Cohen lyric he had more wisdom than most when it came to songs. He's another person, I think, who had a relationship with anxiety and struggle and depression. And that's where all the good stuff comes from, you know. The stuff that moves us, if you look close enough. I've joked with audiences over the years. I said, you know, the things you like about me come from the broken parts. And if we learn to kind of celebrate that in each other more, we wouldn't be so afraid of like talking to the guys that live in the park. And you know, we expect our systems to, let's get them out of the park, we can't have them living there, let's get them in the houses. Like, until you're willing to stop and actually have a conversation with somebody in that spot, you really don't have any kind of idea at all, you know. And the kindness aspect, you know, all those rules apply everywhere like that, you know. That's the freest part of the world we live in here in Canada. I don't think most people know it. That's our freedom, is the ability to be kind and have it reciprocated. That's our truest freedom that we have over here, because we haven't grown up with civil wars and bombing and stuff like that happening. So our ideals, we've become almost stubborn. We want to stamp our feet, and we all have a perspective, and we all have something we want to get across, but it's like part of that is the extension of the privilege of the way we've got to live over here. You know, I think of like Indigenous issues and struggles, and sometimes I try to stay quiet so I can hear from Indigenous people instead of us always kind of putting words to their struggle. And you know, the kindest, most loving thing we can do for each other is hear one another and let somebody feel seen, and like that they're there, that their life is something, you know.
A big theme that has come up through this conversation is embracing the process. And this is what this podcast is called, this Welcome to the Winner Circle, because to me, being a winner means embracing the process rather than being destination oriented. We live in a very destination oriented society. When I get this record, when I get this job, when I get this car, when I get this millions of dollars, I'll be happy. And then you get there and it's always, maybe there's momentarily happiness, and then it's a now what? And the process has come up over and over again in this conversation. And to me, that's what winning is. And that's what it means to step into the winner circle, is to move forward with your eyes on the process and embracing this rather than the destination. What does winning mean to you, Scott?
Just getting to do it at all, really. Just getting to be able to express myself, like thinking about the Afghani musician. In fact, thinking about Afghanistan since the Taliban have come back into power, music's outlawed. To express yourself creatively is outlawed. That's when I'll go to war. That's when I'll dawn, or whatever you want to call it, and go to battle. When that becomes, it's unfathomable. So winning to me is the fact that I can express myself at all, let alone have anybody listen to it. But I also agree, the process that's the life affirming part. That's the healthy stuff, is kind of learning to appreciate the patience and all these self-imposed deadlines and desires. They're all extra. I mean, I think about some of the art that came out 50 or 60 years ago that really inspired me now. There was a lot of struggle. Like there wasn't the internet and all these things. Like to be able to be an artist in the late 50s and make a full-length record alone, that was something that was really reserved for people of a certain status. So the fact that we have Muddy Waters and Lightning Hopkins and Howling Wolves and these artists in our part of the world, we're so privileged that we even managed to get quality recordings of these people who in their own country weren't highly regarded. It took Europe to celebrate these great old blues artists and show the rest of the world how lucky they were to have this, in their own country. It wasn't Americans typically that discovered this stuff, and it was all connected to struggle. They didn't write songs like to go to work in the morning and we're going to write a song and we're going to put it on Spotify. Like these guys were picking cotton and shit, like starving to death. They were writing songs because singing allowed them to pass the time in the brutal heat. So it's like, oh my goodness, like, how am I going to write a song that's anywhere near as good as Howling Wolf if I don't have some appreciation for that struggle? And winning is getting to do it at all. Getting to step in the ring even once. Boy, you've won something. And yeah, it's interesting. Like I think of my brother-in-law. He's I don't want to go into length. I don't know whether he'd be comfortable. He's a very modest guy, but he's a decorated war hero essentially. And we're very different. We come from different worlds in a way, but we get along and we both have respect for each other's careers and who we are within them. And it's interesting when I look at somebody in his circles, like it makes me think back to my cousin. My brother-in-law essentially I came from a very, very, very tough family. And my brother-in-law is a whole other level that's almost unfathomable. And he's the last person that would ever take a swing at you. He's the last person you could really ever make super angry. He'll take charge of a situation if he has to, but he won't use it heavy-handed or aggressively. And it's such a charming thing to see because he really is the toughest guy in the room. He could whoop you, but he never would, because the process for him to get to where he was, he had to overcome it. His relationship with his ego and all that stuff, gone. And I think you can relate to that a bit in your own journey through mixed martial arts and stuff. Like, there's another level to it that has nothing to do with being the toughest guy in the room anymore. Or it's a different kind of philosophy of, like when you listen to Mike Tyson talk now compared to when he was 19, my cousin was a bit of a Mike Tyson. If Cus D'Amato hadn't plucked that kid out of the hood, I mean, he was a dangerous human being, frankly still is, but he's a different kind of dangerous now because he's educated himself and he's used microdosing and various things in cannabis to get in tune with his own mind. And he's way more dangerous now, in my opinion, in a good way. But it's that thing where you so aspire to get to be, I don't know why I use the toughest in the room analogy, but there's really something to that. If you really get to the top spot, you realize, oh, my toughness the equity is way more valuable than my ability to knock this man down. And that's how we wind up with a Muhammad Ali. He realized, oh my God, and he was really more like a Martin Luther. That's who he was. He was a great civil rights leader. He was like, he flipped the whole thing upside down. And he did it because he knew, man, I can get in the ring and knock this guy out, no trouble. And he used that thing that impresses the other men in the room. He used it the right way and the rest of us went, oh boy, pure magic.
Bruce Lee as well. He was a philosopher, and he believed under the stars we were but one family.
Yep.
And he promoted that in his being. I think when you get to the top, you realize there's no top, and there's always someone there, and there's a lot of humility in all those men.
And also a loneliness just to occupy that level. Like when you're Bob Dylan, a Bruce Lee, like you're not rolling around with big groups. You know, Bob probably has a couple close friends that know him as Robert Zimmerman, not Bob Dylan. But imagine being Bob Dylan. How do you sit in a room with other songwriters, you know, or a Richard Pryor or a Dave Chappelle or any of these guys? It's not that they're the best or the top. It's that they've transcended the ego. They've transcended, frankly, what's shallow about the form. No longer like, you look at a Dave Chappelle show, it's not really even funny most of the time. His best work isn't funny at all. It's actually trying to challenge ideals in a palatable way to force us to try to hear it. And I realize he's a controversial name right now, so I'm not bringing him up to marginalize or make anybody feel bad, but I still believe at the core of a Dave Chappelle is a really great artist because of those things. He still has some own personal stuff to reconcile about, you know, how you could make any grouping of people feel at one time. That's a whole other separate thing that, in my opinion, he maybe still does need some work in that area. But the important thing is there's an authenticity to what he's trying to do. And it's why he's not a Kevin Hart, right? Those two guys, that's not the same arena. They're not doing the same work. Same with a Richard Pryor or I'm forgetting, you know, some of these greats, but you know, there's
Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, there's and that's why, like a guy like Eddie Murphy, that's why he left. He went too far into that mainstream world and realized, oh shit, I made a wrong turn.
Yeah.
I know that's true. I mean, not to say that I know Eddie Murphy, but that's what happened. He made these stupid movies and it all got so big and he realized it's gone. That spark, that thing that made it happen, it's gone. If you accept that big thing, you run the risk of losing the great thing. The small time really is where the magic exists most of the time. The amount of people that can do the very big time and actually pull it off. Like in the musical world, a Tom Petty, he did it. He managed to get very big and stay really, really true to who he was as an artist. Bob Dylan's, guys like this, it's very hard to do, you know? There's some part of you that you sell off along the way to make that work, and very few people beat the house. But there are people that actually do it. And I suspect it's probably lonely where they are, you know? To live that way and to be that good at something 9.5 times out of 10 is a lonely world, I think. Just aspiring to be the best is a dangerous proposition, I figure, you know?
And I think it's important to know when to step away. George St. Pierre is a artist that I am really inspired by. And he talks about only the best, you're only the champion for a minute second. There's always another best, and the best is fleeting. And he knew when to step away. And he was one of the only great fighters to step away in his prime. And I think that's like takes a big thing to do.
For sure it does. I've produced I think 3 records for an artist from Peguis First Nation named William Prince. And when we were making the first record, we had a very small budget. So I played most of the instruments on the first record. We couldn't afford to bring in a band. And a lot of things happened. William's career built quite quickly. He's got a very beautiful and natural gift that drew people into him. But he became a father. He lost his father. His father passed away. He became a father himself. All these things going on while I made this record. And there was already a weight to it that felt different than other records I've made. This young man was coming with something, some mojo, some whatever you want to call it, some depth, some struggle. And out of nowhere, in the middle of this record, my girlfriend and I were still together, and we had a home line that wasn't a cell, it was like a landline. And her mom had it put in because her mom lived in Alberta and liked to be able to reach her daughter whenever she wanted. So she figured if she paid to get this landline, that would be her bat phone. And anyway, I really never used it. And my name was not associated with the line at all. And one day I was in the house and that phone rang, and for some reason I picked it up, which I never do. And the voice on the other line was a fellow named Winston Wuttunee. He's an Indigenous elder, performer, teacher. He's a very, very well-known guy, I've come to realize. And I answered the phone, and this voice says, "Hello, Scott. This is Winston Wuttunee calling. We've been watching you on the TV and listening to you on the radio. Can I offer you some advice?" And I thought, of course. And he said, "Well, Scott, should some young person ever come to you and tell you that they look up to you, or maybe that you're their hero, it's not important to know why, but people need people to look up to. My advice to you would be to look them in the eye and say, thank you very much. I'll do my best not to let you down." And that was the whole phone call. And I hung up the phone and thought, whoa, what just happened? You know, it was like a moment out of a movie or something, you know? And the next day, William came over to get back to work on the record. And I said, "Hey, you know who Winston Wuttunee is?" And he said, "Oh, sure, yeah, you know, my aunties all had crushes on him, you know." And I told him that story, and I said, can you imagine? Like, what a thing to do. And at the time, I don't know whether I was particularly aware that I needed that advice, but I did. I needed that advice. Because around that time, because I was open with my struggle and my cousin, and there was a movie called Visiting Day, the CBC produced, and so people became aware of this. And so I got a good number of young artists reaching out to me in trouble, in all sorts of levels of trouble, from suicidal to, you know, ostracized from a community because of various allegations. I mean, the whole gamut of stuff. And prior to any of these things really starting to happen steadily was that phone call from Winston. And prior to that phone call, I don't think I was comfortable with being looked up to, you know? It never really hit me until he said it. But, you know, I came up the way I came up, and I made my mistakes, and I feel like I feel pretty loved and appreciated, but I know that there's people out there that don't love me. I know I've been careless with people's hearts along the way. I've been careless along the way with any number of things. There's certainly people out there that are probably not Scott Nolan fans, and that's not lost on me. But to be able to own that thing when you realize that some artist, whether they were younger than me or not really, to be able to own that in a very selfish way was really, really important. And that lesson, you know, I've seen Winston since, and I don't know that I've really told him this yet, but it really was quite profound advice, because it really allowed me to get past me, you know? It didn't matter if that guy said, "Hey man, I'm really in trouble. Like I respect your music and la la la." Like I had to just get past that, right? You know, I was hung up on it for whatever reason, and it helped kind of free me and realize, oh man, if you can be of service here, that's the greatest feeling there is, I think, you know, especially if it connects to your art and what you already do, you know. It's like, it's a tremendous, tremendous feeling to have, to realize that you can do that, you know, make it matter somehow.
Wow, so much gold shared on this conversation. And maybe my next has already been answered wrong, and that is Scott Nolan, through it all, through the highs and lows, that is this life, that is this hero's journey. What has been the greatest life lesson on the path that you've learned so far that you feel called to share with us right now?
Probably forgiving yourself, giving yourself permission just to be. Whatever weirdness, hang-ups, quirks, orientations, identities, abuses that have come your way, to give yourself permission to be and be heard and seen and be at peace is absolutely it. It's totally it. To have any degree of comfort with who you are is the most important thing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. They can find you, Scott, on Instagram at Scott_Nolan_Landred_music, or even simpler, just visit your website, scottnolan.ca. You have a concert coming up here in Winnipeg on Sunday, November 7th. This will be released on Thursday, November 4th. So I'll make sure to include all the details for that concert.
It's a special room. It's a church that have kind of, when churches struggle to, how do you stay relevant in a multicultural society that's growing all the time, right? So this is one of these churches that are involving in the arts. The West End Cultural Center was a church that the Podolak family, who are behind my show, Mitch Podolak founded Winnipeg Folk Fest. It's another great story and what these people have kind of given to our city. But yeah, they're taking churches that are kind of struggling and having a hard time and breathing new life through arts. So this room where the festival and concert happens is pure magic, really special place. And it's a matinee, which is really unusual for me and tends to be agreeable with a lot of people, that it's at 3 p.m., which is, it's not normally when shows happen. So.
And the location?
It's the Crescentwood United Church, but who call themselves the Crescentwood Arts Center. So it's been something that's been evolving over a few years with Home Roots, with Cranky Fest. And as I said, the Podolak family, I mean, the Jewish dance groups, the Children's Festival, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, the gifts the Podolaks have given our city. And more importantly, that they're kind of helping resurrect them. They're not building and bringing in new things. They're lifting up old things to keep them relevant and healthy. And I love collaborating with them as much as possible, because that's just, I completely agree with their philosophies. And
Well, I'm very excited to check out that concert. And to close, I requested a very special song that I heard you play. That I would love to end this with, and that's Old Friend. And maybe before we go in, or what inspired you to write this song?
I was playing a great little festival in Clearwater, Manitoba, called the Harvest Moon Festival. And my childhood friend lived in the neighboring town in Crystal City, and he owned the Prairie Harvest restaurant. And so this was a number of years ago. I was out there, and it's kind of a little bit of a portrait of the festival. And it was a little farming community that was kind of struggling, and they reinvented themselves as kind of an organic farming community. And back in the early days, we were involved with Percy Smeitzer. If you remember, he went to battle with Monsanto. And so the Harvest Moon are really this great little festival that they really partnered with this little community to build something special. And so this song, it's kind of just a portrait of those little two towns. And there was a great moment. My childhood friend was traveling with me, and I was walking on stage to play like a 3 o'clock set. And in the crowd, you heard a voice say, "McLaren's dog got loose again." And this big farm dog came barreling into the backstage. And my friend, who was kind of new to the festivals, he's like, "I got the dog." And he kind of dove down and started wrestling and playing with the dog. And it was just this kind of hilarious moment. And as I was walking on stage, I looked back at him in the dirt with this big farm dog, and he was smiling. And my friend said, "You're writing a song right now, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I am." And so that's what the song became.
Beautiful. Well, let's the stage is yours.
All right. country kitchen, basement bar, gravel roads under falling stars, west of the valley in the border town. It's where we'll meet once the sun goes down. Radio with the broken antenna, 8-ball over old Vienna, still traveling Highway 3, wondering if you ever wonder about me. Clear water at the river's bend, McLaren's dog got loose again. A 3 o'clock set on the old main stage, big yellow sun staring right in my face. A warm front rolls in from the south, children playing in the schoolhouse. Prairie harvest, full moon, ready or not, winter's coming soon. Pamela with time to spare, passing through La Riviere, it's last call. Everybody's going home. It was almost like no time had passed. Some things are still built to last, like old friends. There's nothing like old friends. The ride home was quiet in the car. The winds cried like a steel guitar. I thought of you passing, boys of rain. Halfway there and it started to rain. I guess sometimes life just gets busy. You out here and us in the city. Next time let's not wait so long. Some things you can count on. Like Pamela with time to spare, passing through La Riviere, it's last call. Everybody's going home. It was almost like no time had passed. Some things are still built to last, like old friends. There's nothing like old friends. Pamela with time to spare, passing through La Riviere, it's last call. Everybody's going home. It was almost like no time had passed. Some things are still built to last, like old friends. There's nothing like old friends.
Oh,
My little
wow.
punk has been sitting here quietly the whole time, if you can believe it.
Beautiful.
Normally she'd be making fussing and making noise by now. She was very quiet the whole hour.
She's
She was
adorable.
in trance, like we all were listening along to this conversation, that song. So beautiful. It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us.
My
Truly
pleasure.
inspiring. Truly inspiring. We close all episodes with a digital fist bump. Welcome to the winner circle, the choice.
Thanks for
We
having
can
me.
all make. Boom. Thank you so much. They can
Much
find
love.
you at scottnolan.ca. Much love. And that's a wrap on today's call.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a
Beautiful
great day, you guys.